Now, the US pharmaceutical giant Johnson & Johnson is pausing clinical trials of an experimental coronavirus vaccine after a volunteer fell sick.
We have temporarily paused further dosing in all our COVID-19 vaccine candidate clinical trials due to an unexplained illness in a study participant. Adverse events, illnesses, accidents, etc., even those that are serious, are an expected part of any clinical study, especially large studies.
The Johnson & Johnson drug is one of 6 anti-COVID candidates being tested in the US. It's considered one of the most advanced, having entered phase 3 trials. This is the second time trials of a potential COVID vaccine have been put on hold. Testing of a jab developed by AstraZeneca and Oxford University was briefly halted in September after a volunteer in the UK showed an adverse reaction. Well, we can now hear from Peter Smith, former chairman of the World Health Organization's Global Advisory Committee on Vaccine Safety. Thank you for joining us on the programme. Does this look like a major setback for Johnson & Johnson, do you think, or just a temporary hitch?
No, I think it's much too early to judge that. This sort of event not infrequently happens in very large vaccine trials. I think there's of the order of 60,000 people in the Johnson & Johnson trial. If an event that they don't have an immediate explanation for occurs in people who have received the vaccine, then they may want to pause to actually investigate that event further to see if it might be related to the vaccine. This happens not infrequently in large-scale clinical trials. You can imagine that if you were to telephone 60,000 people and then telephone them again a week later and ask them if any of them had been sick in that week, it's likely that some would say they had been sick in that week, but you wouldn't necessarily say that that was associated with your first telephone call. So these things happen when you study large populations, and it's too early to judge, I'm sure, for them to judge, which is why they've paused the trial, whether this is related to the vaccine or not.
The US government has already promised to pay Johnson & Johnson more than $1 billion for doses of the vaccine. How much pressure does this put on the company to get it ready as quickly as possible?
I think there is pressure on all vaccine developers to develop COVID-19 vaccines as rapidly as possible because of the global emergency that we're in. I don't think that these large companies are going to be pressured by any government, really, because it's really not in their interests. If they actually release a vaccine before it's ready, that will have bad effects for not only that vaccine, but for that company. So it's very much in the company's interest to ensure that insofar as it's possible in these large trials, they only release products for general use that they are assured are safe.
China already has at least 4 COVID vaccine candidates in the final phase of trials. Now, if we see several competing drugs coming on the market in different countries all at once, how are we going to decide which one is the most effective?
Well, there will be some evidence from those trials of just how effective it is. It's sometimes a little bit difficult to sort of compare directly between trials, but the truth is that one effective COVID vaccine is going to be insufficient to meet the global demand. So we need a significant number of effective vaccines. So there's certainly a place in the sort of global vaccination program for quite a large number of vaccines to be used. And we need such vaccines in order to be able to eventually vaccinate the billions of individuals who are going to require COVID vaccines.
Now, the World Health Organization has urged international cooperation to ensure fair global access to a vaccine when one becomes available, that is. Do you think national interests might get in the way of all that, though?
Well, I think that's always a danger, that governments are always going to look after their own populations before they sort of turn to other populations. But this COVAX facility, which has been set up, where the hope is that many nations will actually contribute to a facility that will provide vaccines for particularly low and middle income countries which are not able to afford to buy them on the open market, as it were. There have been substantial contributions to that, including from countries that, such as the UK, who have already made a big investment in potentially buying vaccines for their own country, but they've also contributed to this COVAX facility, which will make vaccines available for those in low and middle countries as well.
The creators of the Sputnik V vaccine in Russia, they say they're hoping to start mass distribution as early as late October or early November. Do you think that's realistic?
It's very ambitious. Whether it's realistic, I mean, what one would like to see before any very large-scale distribution is the results of what's called a phase 3 efficacy trial, where it really shows whether the vaccine is protective or not. And we haven't seen that for that vaccine yet. The hope is for that vaccine, I guess, and a number of other vaccines, we will have those sort of results available either towards the end of this year or early next year. But until we've actually got data on whether the vaccines actually do protect against COVID-19, I think it would be unwise to distribute vaccines very widely, because we don't want to distribute a product that essentially doesn't work. So we need to see the results from those large-scale trials in which some people are vaccinated, some people get a placebo, and then we look for a difference in incidence between the two groups. If we don't have that sort of data, it's going to be very difficult to make judgments about whether a vaccine is effective or not.
Peter Smith, former chairman of the WHO Global Advisory Committee on Vaccine Safety, thank you for your time.
Okay, pleasure.
And thank you.